I love the Elder Scrolls and everything that remotely fits into that category, so I'm sure I'll be making another video in the future with another handful of titles. We are back in 2025, new year, new me, new games inspired by the Elder Scrolls. So about a few months ago, I released a video covering some indie games that I lovingly refer to as Scrolls-likes, and the video was a massive hit. It's great to see so many people like me who love the Elder Scrolls series and wants to see a similar kind of game from another company, especially considering Bethesda is taking their sweet time with the Elder Scrolls 6 and they're not doing too well at the moment. I covered 3 games that I felt were good enough to be considered indie Elder Scrolls games, and provided a very rudimentary checklist of what I would classify to be elements of a Scrolls-like. And if you want more information, just check out the original video first. The video was inundated with comments requesting more games to be covered, but also provided some more compelling arguments as to what makes a game a Scrolls-like. One of the most important aspects of an Elder Scrolls game that I didn't even mention in the original video is that immersive Sims element. How many other RPGs can you think of where you can cover an NPC's head with a basket and blind him, allowing you to completely rob his store blind? How many RPGs can you think of where you can free throw cabbages into buckets for no reason other than mild entertainment? How many RPGs can you think of where you can drop paintbrushes in the air and use them as makeshift platforms to get to unintended areas? Intended mechanic or not, these are those small moments that really make the Elder Scrolls games the Elder Scrolls games. So I feel like we should definitely add that immersive sim element to the checklist of what I would consider to be a Scrolls-like. Now, I've gotten a lot of requests for different titles, and I didn't mention many of them for different reasons. Dread Delusion and Enderall were both heavily requested, but I didn't mention those games because I've already gone ahead and made full reviews of them, so check those out too. Another heavily requested title was the Wayward Realms, and I didn't include this because, well, there's not really much to show here other than a gameplay trailer. With that said, I've had my eye on this game for some time due to the fact that it's essentially a spiritual successor to the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, helmed by major ex-Bethesda employees like Julian LaFay and Ted Peterson. They just recently put up a Kickstarter to gather funds to get the game into an early access build, and it well surpassed its goal, so we should be seeing this game in one form or another pretty soon. I'll be sure to cover it in extensive detail whenever it arrives. And for the love of Talos, yes, I would consider the Fallout games and Starfield to be Scrolls-likes because they're Bethesda games. I was not expecting to have to clarify that, but here we are. You swits. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to our next batch of Scrolls-likes to help kickstart our 2025 year. Our first Scrolls-like of the evening is a bit of a throwback to an earlier Elder Scrolls game. Anyone who's familiar with my channel would know that I absolutely fell in love with the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. It's such a classic dungeon crawler that invokes that sword and sorcery fantasy that we all crave. Bearded magicians with robes spangled with stars and moons. Big-breasted hussies with leather bikinis that offer no functional protection. Bricked up barbarians that make Arnold Schwarzenegger look like Steve fucking Urkel. I want that. The quest is very reminiscent of that, and while it may look a bit primitive, that's because, well, it is. In fact, it's so old that it was originally released on PDAs. Yeah, remember those? I sure don't, and I'm 26. How do they even market this game? Through carrier pigeon? Anyways, the quest is an old school CRPG. Starting the game gives you a short cutscene providing some backstory, and then you can make your character. Like most retro RPGs, you only have a list of portraits to pick from when it comes to character creation, and you pick your class from a preset before being able to customize and swap out skills. After making your choices, you are immediately dropped in front of a medieval Jacksepticeye. He tells me that I'm some kind of kingdom agent who's trying to get to the bottom of a potential assassination of the king. I then start wandering around, getting quests from random NPCs, and then I discover this cave. Inside the cave are a bunch of bats blocked by a cobweb. After I fail trying to cut down the web, I turn around and notice Justin Bieber walking around in the cave. Dear fucking lord, these NPCs are one fantasy doppelganger away from a lawsuit. Apparently, he's the son of the guy in the house who gave me that quest and proceeds to give me another quest. Considering I can't get past the cobweb, I leave the cave and wander around some more. I manage to discover a small village, stocked with a tavern to rest quests and eat food, an alchemist for potions, and a tailor and blacksmith for armor and weapons. I purchased a few things before heading on out. As I wander, it starts to dawn on me just how awful the controls are. I get this was originally intended for PDAs, but the combat can get annoying even in the first 30 minutes. The quest takes place entirely on a grid, so moving, turning, and attacking are all based on the grid. Problem is, you can only turn and move in a cardinal direction. You can't move or look diagonally, so oftentimes you'll be fighting an enemy, you'll get their health low, they'll pussy out and run away, and they'll only have to shift one tile to the left in order to completely disappear from your view. Then you have to walk forward, turn to whatever direction they're at, probably get hit in the process, and then you can take another swing at them. Rinse and repeat until you can finish them off. What's especially annoying is fighting more than one enemy. Later on, I find this thief who gives me a quest to raid this dungeon. As I progress through the dungeon, I get junked by two highwaymen, who can both damage me at the same time, but I can only attack one enemy at a time. What's worse is that there seems to be no attack priority. Like, you can't turn and single out the guy who's one hit away from death. Instead, he backs away, causing the other guy to take point, and then the injured opponent will rejoin the fight, but now you can only attack the guy who took his place. Just let me finish off the weaker guy, he's right fucking there! So after getting smacked down by these guys, I decided to tackle this dungeon another time and back out. I take a few steps past the entrance to find a couple of other thieves. However, one of them drops a perfect quality katana, which is a substantial upgrade to the cheap club I was wielding before. I might be onto something here. I run back to town, use the gold I got from fighting bandits to properly gear myself up, and return to the dungeon. This time I was able to cut down to 2 bandits, letting me loot the storeroom. Here I find a handful of books, a potion that restores unholy health, which I don't really know what that does, and a heavy poleaxe that's another substantial upgrade to the katana. After getting filled with confidence, I go beyond another door to find a powerful shaman. I was expecting a fight, but he's actually not hostile. Instead, he intimidates me by telling me to look at 4 mirrors in the room, which I presume will spawn NPCs that'll fuck me up if I say no to him, so I hear him out. He gives me a quest to go find these special skulls so he can resurrect the people in the mirrors, all the while talking his shit. You win this time, pal. In conclusion, the quest is a game. I know I didn't spend too long talking about this game, but that's really because what you see here is what you get. Would I wholeheartedly recommend it to everyone looking for an encapsulating and engaging RPG experience? Probably not, but it's still a unique title worth mentioning. The hand-drawn art style is very unique and charming, and it gave me that same childhood sense of fantasy nostalgia that I got when I played games like RuneScape back in the day. You can get the quest on Steam for $10, but it regularly goes on sale for $5, which I actually think is a great price for what you're getting. So if you're craving an old school RPG, give this game a try. On to the next Scrolls-like.
You think you're tough?
I'm gonna do a repeat of the first Scrolls-like video by adding another game that just barely qualifies as a Scrolls-like in the number 2 slot. If anything, this game is more reminiscent of old school immersive sims like Arx Fatalis and Ultima Underworld. But considering the Elder Scrolls was initially inspired by Ultima Underworld, I felt it was fitting to lump this game in. Monomyth is a first-person dungeon crawler that really channels that old school RPG feel. And I would have included this in my original video, but the game released into 1.0 right as I was wrapping up with editing. So it's because of this game that I decided to jump back in and cover some more Scrolls-likes. Starting a new game takes you to a very basic character creation. You have a backstory that's left intentionally vague, and customizing your character is again only done by clicking through different portraits. What's funny though is the option to add your own custom portrait by dropping in a PNG file, so have fun with that one. Once you do that, you then distribute your starting points to whatever skills you'll want to use. There's no class system in Monomyth, just a simple XP system where you gather XP by killing enemies. Once you get enough XP, you then have to seek out a shrine that serves as a checkpoint. Here, you can level up and distribute more attribute and stat points, and if you die, you revert back to your last checkpoint. Unless of course you quick save, which I recommend you frequently do. You start your run with a tutorial that shows you the basics of the various simulation elements you'll be interacting with, and this is a ton of fun. You can press a hotkey to hold out your torch, and this can be helpful for lighting candles and setting things on fire, including doors and pretty much any wooden object. Bonfires and ovens can serve as cooking stations where you physically have to drop down raw food and watch it cook before consuming it safely. And it even goes as far as the entire process of baking a pie. Throwing dough into an oven and watching it rise into a nice loaf of bread was a really neat touch. On the other hand, light sources can be detrimental, as enemies can see you more easily in a well-lit area. For this, you can employ the use of water arrows, reminiscent of the Thief series, to extinguish these light sources and sneak by undetected. My absolute favorite part of the interactivity is with the forging system. Weapons and armor will degrade over time, so you can sometimes find these blacksmithing areas. If you have a blacksmithing hammer with you, you can actually heat up your metal equipment, place them on the anvil, and whack them with your blacksmithing hammer to restore their durability. And of course, since this also acts as a heat source, you can also cook your fish in it. I mean, you're already getting mercury from fish, so you may as well go ahead and add some iron to your diet. The sandbox nature of this game really sets it above the rest. Here's this one area where I have to jump on these pillars to get to a room filled with treasure, but some of the pillars fall upon landing. This would be super annoying to get through, so I instead ate a plant I discovered that increases my jump height, and I just jumped across the entire room, completely bypassing the pillars. I absolutely love these moments where the game gives you a functioning game world, but also gives you the tools to break said game world if you wish to do so. And this design philosophy is slowly being weeded out in the more recent Bethesda games. Now, with all that being said, the combat is not the best. I do like how Monomyth uses a direction-based attack system, similar to the combat you would see in Morrowind. Weapons have different damage numbers depending on if you're slashing, thrusting, or chopping. Blunt weapons and axes tend to do more damage by chops, whereas swords, rapiers, and daggers are better suited for thrusting. That's pretty cool, but Monomyth puts these systems to the test by being extremely difficult. Even after pumping some points into vitality, it seems like most enemies that aren't rats can easily 2-tap you if you're not careful, and fighting more than one enemy is almost always a complete death sentence. You have direction-based light attacks and power attacks, but you can also use a kick to send back your enemies and give you some breathing room. But this doesn't seem to do anything if you don't have stamina, and if you're just starting out, your stamina will likely deplete in just 2 swings, depending on your weapon. Even if you do have stamina, the kick doesn't seem to interrupt every enemy, which can make fighting certain monsters absolutely insufferable. I reverted back to a quick save numerous times in order to fight this water elemental, who constantly tries to splash you with his water spell that takes away more than half your health, and it seems like there's no possible way to stun him out of it. It could be possible that you're meant to avoid these water elementals, which was precisely what I did with the next water elemental I found in the dungeon, so I guess you always have that option if you find a particular monster too difficult. Aside from melee, you also have more stealthy playstyles like daggers and bows, as well as an interesting magic system. Getting a magic spell in the Elder Scrolls games is as simple as buying a magic book or paying someone to make the spell and give it to you, but this process is a bit underwhelming. In Monomyth, you must first discover the spell in the form of a glowing scroll. You then have to discover these echo stones. These echo stones are then arranged on a board in order to actually learn the spell and be able to use it, but you also have to meet the specified intelligence requirement. If you don't, then the spell is considered too complicated for your big dumb smooth brain, and you won't be able to internalize the arcane knowledge of the spell. This makes magic incredibly strong but also incredibly rewarding, as you have to make numerous commitments to leveling and exploring to learn even the most basic spells. Another brutal aspect of Monomyth is the dungeon itself. Once you get through the tutorial, you'll eventually make your way to a chapel and progress the main story. But beyond the chapel is an absolute maze of small tunnels, caves, and places of interest. Paths will intertwine and fork off to various dead ends and locked doors, and you better hope you were able to find the map to this floor, because I'd argue this would be absolutely impossible to navigate without it. There were some puzzles where I physically had to write down symbols from various walls in order to complete the puzzle, and I absolutely love this as a somewhat old school RPG fan, but this is definitely not for the faint-hearted. I think it also helps that this is a very overlooked indie game, as it's hard to even find walkthroughs showing you where to go, so you're really on your own here. I'd say if you're itching for a good hardcore first-person dungeon crawler, this would be right up your alley. On to the finale. The finale for the second batch of Scrolls likes is arguably as close as we can get to an actual Elder Scrolls game. Ardenfall is an open world RPG, and the only Scrolls like so far to have a fully functional first and third person camera. Now, to be fair, the Bloodline does technically have a third person camera, but it's incredibly buggy, and even the developer states it's primarily intended just to view your character. Ardenfall, however, can be played entirely in third person, which is pretty neat, though that does come at the cost of watching your character constantly perform perform this goofy ass walk cycle and jump like he's on the moon. Ardenfall is the only game in this video to not be in a 1.0 state. Instead, the game is currently available only as a demo, so hopefully in the future we'll be seeing something more fleshed out. What we have available to us is incredibly promising though, and I'll be looking forward to an early access release. So you start the demo creating your character. You have access to a small selection of unique races, hair and horn options, and your choice of background traits. I went for a more spellcaster playstyle because I heard from many people that this game was heavily inspired by Morrowind, and knowing how nutty spellcasting can be in Morrowind, I wanted to try it here. I love the design of the races you can choose from, and adding your background gives another layer of depth to the role-playing experience. After creating your character, you then navigate through a tutorial dungeon, showing you the basics of exploration and combat. Right off the bat, you'll notice the game has a very distinct art style. I like the hints of Asian culture thrown into a more tribal fantasy style, and the game also has an optional setting to turn on retro mode, which basically just pixelates the game world to your preference. I personally do prefer the setting on at a really low value, but for the sake of making this game look as good as possible, I turned it off. A major part of Ardenfall is a reputation system, which directly affects dialogue in a more natural way. In most RPGs, your NPC's disposition of you is usually a single value, which overall determines how much they like you.
Such adventures! How I envy you!
But Ardenfall has 3 different types of disposition: a personal reputation, a guild reputation, and a general area reputation. All of these reputations play into how the NPC reacts to you as a character, and the speech checks are even more interesting as they rely on conversational context, meaning that even if you meet the skill requirements to pass a speech check, your reputation or previous dialogue choices could still lead you to fail the speech check. We'll have to see how the system fares in the near future, but this could be a very interesting mechanic once it gets fully implemented. The combat, however, needs some work. Now, to be fair, I don't expect much from a demo for an indie game inspired by another game where combat is basically you waggling a sword that phases through everything it touches for hours on end, but the difficulty can be pretty annoying. Like Tainted Grail and Monomyth, enemies can easily two-tap you at times, which can be especially annoying when you're fighting one of these teleporting enemies that warps behind you. The animations could also be improved as well, as there's not a lot of satisfying feedback to fighting things, other than this cool slow-mo effect you get when you land a killing blow on an enemy. The real star of this demo is just the overall immersion factor. Like Morrowind, the straight up weirdness of this world and its inhabitants are what make me want to come back and explore it more. Finding unique interactions that aren't laid out right in front of you on a red carpet. For example, I remember coming across a guy trying to sell me this livestock animal called a Yanaki, only to find out later that the animal was stolen from a nearby village. I reported the man to the guards and the thief was later arrested, and I was able to see him in a jail cell after returning to the village. There were no quest markers that took me to this location, or even a quest at all for that matter. It was literally just a spur of the moment scenario where I was like, oh yeah, I remember this guy trying to sell me this Yanaki, I didn't know it was stolen, but there he is. Not everything needs to have these grandiose quest celebrations that flash dopamine receptors in front of your face in order to give you a good experience. If there's a good enough game world and you feel like your choices have an impact on said game world, then that's enough for a solid experience. And I think that's where Ardenfall really has the advantage as a true Scrolls-like. There's so much potential for this weird, colorful world full of unique monsters and races, and albeit the graphics are intentionally rudimentary, the combat is a bit stiff, and it does have some small performance issues here and there, I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on this game to see where it goes. Once it reaches into an early access or 1.0 state, I am definitely going to be doing a full review. That's going to wrap it up for our second batch of Scrolls-like games. Of course, I will be adding the links to all of these games down below into the description, so if you want to check out any of these games, go check out the link. If you like the Elder Scrolls content I've been pumping out, then hit like and subscribe. I'm actually working on a video for a game that's releasing next month that many people are going to refer to as a Scrolls-like, so stay tuned for that. I would also like to announce that I now have an official Discord channel. I'll also be providing the link for that in the description below, so if you want to join and chat with some other like-minded people and chat about RPGs, the Elder Scrolls, and FPS games, then knock yourself out. I'm going to try to be as active as I can in this Discord, maybe posting some behind-the-scenes photos and things like that of what I'm working on, so if you're interested in all of that, then join the Discord. So that's all. Stay safe and... I'm feeling quite hungry.